Good morning. Okay. We're going to read the next little section. Where did I leave off? Here we are. I left off on transformational agreements. Did I read this? No, yeah, I read that one. I read that one, grace and charism. Flying home. I'm just gonna put this pillow behind my back. Okay, yeah, better. Flying home. Since the earliest days of written history, and probably long before, dreams have provided a symbolic pathway to our hidden fears and desires. By revealing to us the language in which our psyche speaks, dreams illuminate not only the dilemmas or opportunities that we may be facing right now, but also the very way our soul visualizes those situations. Sigmund Freud, who calls the dreams the royal road to the unconscious. Carl Jung and many others since have all presented elaborate methods for interpreting dreams through their complex symbolic imagery. But the key to some dreams lie in a simple understanding of the meaning of the central image. Over the past 18 years, for instance, I have had a series of related dreams that all revolved around one consistent image: an airplane taking flight. The first dream featuring this airplane occurred in 1982, when I was at a tremendously low point in my life. Just a few years before, I had been getting increasingly disillusioned with my work as a journalist. Then one day I was given an assignment to cover a workshop on death and dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. The level of suffering in that workshop and the astonishing way in which Kubler-Ross was able to help people devastated by the death of a loved one inspired me to return to school and study religion and mythology. But the postgraduate degree in theology that I earned didn't help me find my niche any more than my BA in journalism had. 2 years before leaving graduate school, I was struggling to find a clear direction for my life. Working as a secretary in the Department of Pharmacology at Northwestern University, I could not figure out where I was going. I felt as if I were living on a pendulum that was oscillating between worlds. My spiritual studies lifted me up, but then I was swung back to earth and the panics and fears of ordinary life. I became stuck in a deep depression that began to feel like a thick mental weight, kicking off what would become a decade of severe migraine headaches. After months of this dark time, I reached the point at which I said to a friend, "I've got to do something. A part of me is dying, and if I don't do something soon, I will die." I meant it. I felt that I had lost my trust in life itself, even though at the same time I still completely trusted God would somehow lead me through it all. I was living in a psychologically and emotionally contradictory state, which made me even more desperate. Then I had a very unusual dream. Jung might have called it a big dream. I was the only passenger in a small but high-powered jet plane. My plane was still on the ground, idling in what looked like a stall in a barn that held a number of other planes in similar stalls. Each of the other planes took off in succession, as they were meant to, but my plane continued to wait for permission from the control tower. While I grew angrier by the minute, a Finally, I relayed a message to whomever was sitting in the control tower. Hey, what about me? Turn your motor off, came the reply. We're holding you until the skies are safe for your journey. My plane was in a stall just as I was stalled physically, emotionally, personally, professionally. Yet the control tower, which to me, even in the dream, represented God, sent the message that I was cared for and watched over. Still asleep, I became saturated in the feeling that God was in his heaven and all was right in my world. When I woke from that dream, I was content to wait for my appropriate time of departure. I lost my desperation to find a concrete direction for my life. Every part of my life looked different from that moment onward. I was being watched over. There was a plan for me that was already in motion behind the stillness and the frozenness of my external life. Buoyed by the reassuring message in my dream, I decided to enjoy the emptiness of purpose in which I was floating. My job as a secretary provided everything I needed to survive in the physical world. I had a paycheck as well as the precious gift of time to do whatever I wanted after work. I had no heavy professional assignments hanging over my head, no deadlines, and no stress from not being able to do my job well. I had a liberated life. I was free to spend time with friends and family, and I enjoyed life in a carefree way that I have not been able to do since. Because I had absolutely no private agenda or ambitions within the political and financial organizations where I worked, I could not have cared less if I lost my job. I had no desire to achieve any rank or privilege among the group of professionals with whom I worked, and this made me feel happy. Although in the eyes of the scientists for whom I worked, I had nothing, I actually had everything. These scientists gave me my first education in how awful human beings could become and act when motivated by insecurity and ambition. Competing for grant money, promotions, and power, the scientists were held captive by their fears of others' success. When I went home each evening, I left on my desk everything related to my work, but they went home with briefcases filled with the weight of the work and fear. In that occupation, I learned of one of the most spiritually productive truths that I now rely on every day of my life. When you do not seek or need external approval, you are at your most powerful. I'm going to read that part again because it is true. Let's see. When you do not seek or need external approval, you are at your most powerful. Nobody can disempower you emotionally or psychologically. This spiritual security gave me a liberated feeling that was practically euphoric. It made me appreciate why the famous line, "To thine own self be true," in Shakespeare's Hamlet is considered a spiritual commandment. A spiritual commandment. I like that too. To thine own self be true. You cannot live for prolonged periods of time within the polarity of being true to yourself and needing the approval of others. At some point, you will realize that you are doing harm to yourself by being what you think you should be so that someone approves of you. In the language of a contract, compromising who you are to gain the approval of another is a very precise example of giving away a piece of your spirit. You give away more and more of yourself until you have no strength or sense of self left. I understood then that manipulation is the art of making another person's spirit dance for personal amusement. And only through honoring oneself do we become strong enough to refuse to dance. My airplane dream led me to dance for anyone but ourselves. My airplane dream led me to a freedom from my own personal for my own mental weight, depression, and anxiety about my future and purpose. Indeed, within a few years, I met a couple who shared my growing interest in human consciousness, and they invited me to join them in starting a publishing company in New Hampshire. 13 years later, my life had changed dramatically. I had become a professional medical intuitive, teacher, and author. In 1995, when I started work on the autonomy of spirit, I had another airplane dream, the first since the initial one in 1982, and it proved to be the next in a series. The airplane became the specific symbol or archetype, not unlike a private phone number that would be used in my dreams to get my attention. Each airplane dream was a direct communication from the divine. The airplane signaled that I was following the right course, one that had been laid out for me and that I had somehow agreed to. Each dream also measured the progress I was making toward completing my flight plan and getting a book off the ground. At the time of the dreams, I was feeling that I had not yet reached the depth of the message I wanted to communicate in the autonomy of the spirit. I was walking around it, so to speak, but had not yet seen its full meaning. In the first dream of the autonomy sequence, I was running through an airport to catch a flight, but the plane left without me. Sometime later, I dreamed that I was about to board my flight when I was paged on the loudspeaker and a voice told me, "Please pick up the white phone." I knew that if I answered the page, the plane would leave without me. Nevertheless, I decided to take the call, and as I lifted the receiver of the white wall phone at the airport, I turned around to see my airplane take off, just as I knew it would. I expected to hear a voice when I put the phone to my ear, someone who would give me the direction I needed on my book. But there was no voice on the other end of the receiver. I hung up the phone, turned to face an empty airplane gate, and left the airport feeling that I had been abandoned. In the next dream, I made it onto the plane only to be told that there was no seat for me and I would have to get off. The heat of humiliation flushed over me as I looked at the faces of hundreds of people staring at me as if I had invaded their airspace. Air, for me, represented the astrological element of the mind, and I took the dream to mean that I was traveling through conceptual territory where I did not yet belong. Shortly after that dream, I was still frustrated that I had not yet found the core message of autonomy. But as I was lecturing to a group of 28 students, I turned to write something on a white flip chart and instantly downloaded an image that merged three great mystical traditions and their biological implications: the 7 chakras of the East, the 7 Christian sacraments, and the 10 sephirot of the Tree of Life from the Jewish Kabbalah. In less than a second, I received, I understood, I accepted, and I started the book over again. During the next dream in this sequence, I finally was able to board my plane. I spotted an empty seat way in the back and coach, but as I was heading for it, I noticed the flight attendant looking for me. I tried to avoid her, and on reaching my seat, I slid my body as low into the seat as possible and covered my face with a magazine. But it was too late. We had made eye contact, and it was evident that I would not be allowed to stay on board. Besides, even in the dream, I had come to the realization that I simply could not hide from anyone. Had I been meant to be in the seat, I would have been allowed to stay. But it had someone else's name on it, and nothing I could do would change the fact that I was not scheduled to be in that seat. I was despondent. I thought that I was finally doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I was extremely eager for the manuscript to be finished. That was the problem, I later figured out. I was too eager. The manuscript would be completed on time, but not in my time, and I still had a great deal of work to do on it before it would be accepted. Ideas and insights that had seemed to me self-evident needed fuller development to become airborne, and so I wasn't being given the green light just yet. After many more months of refinements, the manuscript was finally accepted. As I was waiting for it to be published, I had the final airplane dream connected to that book. Once again, I boarded the plane and spotted the same empty coach seat where I had sat on the previous flight. I quickly slipped into the seat, buckled up, and held my breath, waiting for takeoff. My heart was racing in the dream, and my body was shaking with anxiety. And then it happened again. The flight attendant spotted me. Just as I was preparing to grab my carry-on and climb out of my seat, she said, "Why don't you take your belongings and come with me? Because there has been a mistake." I followed her down the aisle thinking, whatever could be the mistake could be this time. But we passed the exit door of the plane and she led me directly into first class. "Here you go," she said. "This is your seat. You've earned it." Following these words, I was given a bottle of champagne and the plane took off. I did not have another airplane dream until I started work on the book Sacred Contracts. I hadn't been making much progress on the manuscript, and once again I was sinking in emotional quicksand. The dream began with me walking into an airline office in which I found myself applying for a job. For the first time, however, I was aware of the name of the airliner, Aer Lingus, the Irish company. I was waiting in line at the ticket counter along with a truly oddball assortment of people. I wondered what I was doing there, and once I figured out that I was applying for something, I was convinced that I did not qualify. When it was my turn to hand in my application, the gruff woman behind the desk grabbed it out of my hand and walked into the back room. I stood there waiting for what felt like an eternity until she reemerged. "All right, then you've got a job," she announced. "Now get on that plane." "But I don't have any clothes or money or even a passport," I said. "That's too bad. Certainly either leave behind everything you have or you get on the plane. Or you can't get on the plane." "But," I said, "some things are very precious to me." She was unmoved. "Either you get on that plane with nothing or you stay here." I looked at all of the people boarding the plane, none of whom was carrying any luggage, not even a handbag, and I told her that I needed time to get my things together. How could they do this? I wondered. How could they get on that plane with no luggage? When I protested once again that I didn't have any clothes or money, the woman replied, "Everything you need will be provided. You'll be met when the plane lands." All I can remember thinking then was, I hope the clothes they have for me are the right size, and I'd prefer designer clothes. At that moment, I heard my name being paged, and I saw the white wall phone from the earlier dream. I knew from experience what would happen if I picked up that phone. The flight was almost fully boarded now, and the woman with the stern voice repeated her warning. "Either you leave everything behind and get on that plane now," she said, "or you stay here and move backward." As I ran through the gate and onto Aer Lingus jet, I thought, why am I doing this? I don't live in Ireland. I don't know who these people are. I don't know where I'm going. I'm going to a foreign place. I somehow knew that the question I had been asking were not mythical or hypothetical. They were profoundly spiritual questions. Do you really want to take flight in the second half of your life? Are you willing to let go of everything to do so? After boarding that flight, I found that the seats in the first class section, to which I was once again escorted, were arranged in rows like a movie theater, facing the cockpit, which had enormous glass windows, like the ones of the film version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Looking out, I had a panoramic view until we entered an enormous fog bank. Frustrated at the lack of a view, I started to go out of my seat, but the flight attendant told me to stay where I was. I insisted that I wanted to see the pilot, but she answered simply, "This isn't allowed." I knew I had to trust that I'd get out of the fog eventually, just as I knew that I must have answered yes to those earlier questions, but I still didn't know exactly what I had said yes to. Even though it was a dream, the decision to get on that plane felt like a single most terrifying choice I'd ever made. And with the good reason, as it turned out. The latest dream marked the beginning of a cycle of wrenching personal losses, during which I separated from close friends, family, and business associates, either through literal death or by painful parting of ways. I was at the grand turning point, the halfway mark in my life. I felt as though I were living in a field of death, having to let go of so much and so many that I loved so dearly. I relate to this, including an older brother who passed away during this deep, excruciating period of spiritual excavation. Strangely, too, I was scheduled to teach a 10-day workshop in Ireland the day that he died, and indeed, after his memorial, I flew to Shannon Airport, and the final leg of my journey was on Aer Lingus. Yet, even in the midst of my hell, this dream brought comfort to me because it forecast that I was about to fly into a new, more rewarding place and experience. Despite what all these airplane dreams pretended, they were ultimately reassuring to me. They told me again and again, in no uncertain terms, you're flying the right path. They also said, you still need direction, you still need to make choices, you still have to meet the unknown, and we're still checking your attitude. But they said it so lovingly that I never awoke in fear, despite the fact that within the dreams themselves, I often felt anxious, abandoned, and confused. As I labored on my new book, the significance of this dream and the ones preceding it became increasingly clear to me. I knew that I was being supported, that the universe would not let me get too far ahead of myself or fail to get where I was supposed to go. A big part of its meaning was that I knew that the dream was also about the book itself. Even the name Aer Lingus suggested that the vehicle I was traveling on had to do with language, with expressing the idea in the book that I had been struggling to get airborne. It also assured me that the plane had a destination, and that a greater force was at work, a force that had reserved a seat for me and expected me on board. Although I'd never given up hope of God's help, I hadn't expected to come through the vehicle of my own dreams. I had never really paid much attention to my dreams or even read books about their interpretation. Yet, they had provided me with the most extraordinary guidance through difficult times in my life. They had also helped me to let go of an old view of myself and undirected and unsure, and to begin to see a different shape to my life. Even if I hadn't believed in God, my dreams would have made me rethink that position. The dreams reinforced my belief that events take place by design, that our life is laid out in steps and stages, arranged in such a way that we always have the opportunity for spiritual transformation, which is the ultimate goal of working with your contract. Spiritual transformation results when you move from seeing things strictly in physical, material terms to seeing that there are reasons why things happen as they do, that there is a greater plan behind them. Your sacred contract allows you countless chances to grow and change, dependent only on your willingness to pick up the subtle clues and cues that appear along the way. Dreams, intuitions, apparent coincidences, and chance encounters are just a few of the cues that will lead you on the path to genuine transformation. And then I'm going to read some archetypes here. Okay, so we left off on, Avenger. Avenging angel, savior, messiah. This archetype is related to manifestations. This archetype and its related manifestations respond to a need to balance the scales of justice, sometimes by employing aggressive techniques. Attorneys who work for impoverished or disadvantaged, or who volunteer part of their time for pro bono work, are modern avengers. Bringing war criminals to trial or legally pursuing corporations that harm societies are examples of the avenger on a global scale, fueled by a sense of righteousness in behalf of society. One can also be motivated to avenge an injustice against oneself or one's family. The avenging angel is an expression of this archetype of mythic proportions that suggests that one is on a mission from God, as in the case of Joan of Arc. On the global level, the shadow manifests its avenging perceived immoral behavior by resorting to violence, from acts of eco-terrorism to bombing abortion clinics. The rightness of one's cause can never justify harming innocent third parties. Gandhi countered the shadow of social vengeance by emphasizing passive resistance to illegitimate authority. In evaluating your connection to this archetype, review your life for experiences in which your primary motivation was to defend or represent a cause on behalf of others. One instance is not enough. You need to relate to this archetype as primary force through which many of the choices and actions of your life are directed. A burning desire to get even can be so forceful that you organize a lifetime around meeting that end. Films: Ingrid Bergman in The Visit, Jane Fonda in Cat Ballou, Jane Fonda, Dolly Parton, and Lily Tomlin in 9 to 5, Vincent Prince in Theater of Blood, Shadow, an actor who kills his critics, Al Pacino in The Godfather, Shadow, Robert De Niro, Robert Mitchum in Cape Fear, Shadow. Television: The Avengers. Drama: The Orestia by, I'm going to butcher this name, Aeschylus. Hamlet and Macbeth by Shakespeare. Fiction: To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper S. Lee. Religion and myth: The Furies or Erinyes, avenging the spirits of Roman and Greek myth. Bastet, Egyptian cat-headed goddess who is the instrument of Ra's vengeance. Durga, vengeful warrior goddess of the Hindu pantheon. Kali, Hindu mother goddess of symbol of destruction who annihilates ignorance and maintains the world's order. Kali. Okay, and one more. Beggar, homeless person, indignant. Completely without material resources, the beggar is associated with dependence on the kindness of others. Living on the streets, starvation, and disease, whether in New York City or Calcutta. It is easy to believe that the archetype of the beggar is solely a negative one, but that is an illusion. A person need hardly be starving for food to be considered a beggar. People beg for attention, love, authority, and mental objects. We throw a dog a bone to give a powerless being a treat of power. From a symbolic perspective, the beggar archetype represents a test that compels a person to confront self-empowerment, beginning at the base level of physical survival. Learning about the nature of generosity, compassion, and self-esteem are fundamental to this archetypical pattern. Patrick Swayze in City of Hope. Fiction: Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain. Nonfiction: Meeting the Mad Woman by Linda Scheer Leonard, PhD. Religion and myth: Lazarus, the beggar in Luke, who is carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom after the death, while the rich man outside whose gate he begged went to Hades. Yeta, Japanese beggar who may be disguised for Inara, the god of food or goddess of rice. Odysseus, who designed himself as a ragged beggar when he returned home from Troy. Lan Kai, a Taoist myth, one of the 8 immortals who dressed in rags and roams the streets as a drunken beggar.